with Max.
How's it going?
We are going to be talking about three things today: holster selection, belt selection, and combining the two things. We see a lot of stuff at our events and our classes.
All that stuff.
Some of it not so good. Sometimes it's a matter of a specific thing like a holster that's just not right. Sometimes a holster and a belt can both be good quality, but the combination is not good. And we'll show you a little bit about that later. Let's talk a little bit about holsters.
We always have to remember everything's purpose driven, right? So the purpose of a holster is to, hold our gun, right? We want to have good retention on the gun as well as the trigger guard fully covered, right? So these Blade Tech holsters are phenomenal out of the gate. First time holsters, we have an outside the waistband variant here. Good little paddle clip. Obviously the gun's not going to go anywhere, and the trigger guard's fully covered on both sides of the pistol. Blade Tech also has other options like their inside the waistband line holsters, which do the exact same thing. Cover the trigger guard, good retention on the gun as well. As for some other options that are out there, sticky holsters are great options. However, you have to remember the intended purpose. This is for concealed carry, pocket carry, maybe even transporting the gun, let's say in your range bag. They are sized, so what we have seen in the past at a couple classes and a few other events is that people use these as a universal holster.
So they just see it as a bucket for the gun.
Yeah, it's just one big bucket, but it doesn't fit everything, right? You could put anything in there, but it doesn't cover the trigger guard, and that's probably the biggest safety hazard, especially if you're going to slam this in your pants or in your pocket or anywhere, right? There's another option too that we've seen before, and it's this guy. I'll let you talk about it, David, a little bit here.
Don't know if I'd call it an option. It's actually
very true.
Really probably not an option. This is a snap holster. Somebody might get something like this for their vehicle, right? Securely encase it in their vehicle. The problem with this type of holster, and just a disclaimer, we don't sell anything like this, is that it is just really poorly constructed and designed, and actually just really doesn't secure the gun and fully exposes the trigger guard. So this is something that you don't want to get. I wouldn't even recommend keeping your gun in this in your vehicle. Certainly would never accept anything like this in a class or event.
Yeah.
The next thing that's important to consider, I think, is belts. People have misconceptions about the purpose of belts when it comes to supporting firearms. This applies both to outside carry and, say, a dress belt that you might wear with clothing to conceal carry, right? So
we've got a couple options here. So we have, I think the best visual is, why don't you compare, let's say, a dress belt with a specific gun belt?
Right. So here, for example, we have a belt that is designed specifically for concealed carry. It's a dress belt, but it's very heavy reinforced leather, very high quality. And you can see when I hold it out like this, it's very stiff. It just hangs out there. This is, at first glance, what appears to be a fairly decent dress belt, and in fact it's exactly the same width as this belt, but the problem is it is just doesn't really have any rigidity.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is going to support a firearm and perhaps some magazines and a magazine pouch. This will not. Okay, and we're going to demonstrate that in a few minutes. And then you have whether to wear the belt, in what manner to wear the belt, I should say. You have a belt that is designed to be worn sort of on the outside, okay, not through belt loops like the belt that Max is wearing. And then you have belts that are designed to wear inside the belt loops like I'm wearing. Can you talk a little bit about your...
Yeah, so if you choose the outer belt wear, stability is the main key for it, right? Because you're not taking the belt and sliding it through your pant loops. So you want to make sure that the equipment doesn't slide around, it doesn't sag, it doesn't go anywhere. Honestly, it's very convenient in that everything's in the same spot, but I mean, I zip tie and secure everything there. The main thing is, if you are going to go with an option like this, you must get a very sturdy belt, right? There's a lot of different companies out there that make them, and then there's a lot of different attachment methods that will prevent all of your equipment from sliding around. What we see a lot of times, and we'll throw in some B-roll here, is when people are taking, let's say, a leather belt, and then they're putting 2, 3, 4 magazines in their gun. Everything is sliding down, which will affect them on their draw, a safe draw that is, and then all of their equipment is sagging down, or they might even be having a yard sale by dropping all their magazines. and that's something that we want to stray away from.
Good. So why don't we demonstrate some of these and show people what we're talking about? All right, so here's an example of something we see a lot at our steel shoots, all right?
Of course, yeah.
And it just makes us cringe, okay? I've got myself a dress belt here. It's an 1.5 inch thick belt, but it is just a normal dress belt. And notice I've not put it through any loops. I've just wrapped it around my waist just the same way Max has his belt. But the difference is this belt is simply not designed for this. Look at how this mag pouch shifts around and the holster shifts around. Notice how everything is drooping down, and watch what happens when I draw. You see how the belt rides up like this, or try to take a magazine out, everything moves, so it's very unstable. This can get to the extreme where it's just outright unsafe, and a lot of times you see these folks wearing these belts real high up,
Yeah.
like on their belly, because it sags so much. So this, if this was the only belt I had, would have to wear it inside the belt loops, okay, for any sort of event or class. And even then, it would still be a little bit saggy. When you went to draw, you definitely feel that holster moving. That can be a safety hazard, because if you pull on a holster that has a little retention, that might get my finger wanting to get on that trigger prematurely. And certainly reholstering's a problem.
If I may add a couple things too, it's even this depiction is inaccurate, because a lot of times when we're going at the steel shoot, going through classes, you're carrying far more than 2 additional magazines on one of the guns, right? You're carrying, what, 4 or 5 magazines at a
Yes.
time. Obviously they're all weighted, right? There's ammo in them. So the whole system sags even more.
Yes.
But if you are going to do something like this, I would suggest maybe going with a far more sturdy belt. Try to make sure that the magazines don't shift as much. Make sure your gun doesn't shift when you draw or reholster, because of the aforementioned issues of shooting yourself. So.
Or wear pants with belt loops, right?
Yeah.
Gym shorts are not
that's
appropriate
another thing.
for
Gym shorts,
for a class or a shooting
joggers,
event.
stuff like that. So,
Exactly.
yeah, just try and stray away from that, especially if it's going to be a heavy round count day or a round count class. Now that we have David halfway undressed,
Yes,
let's go ahead and
just on my belt there.
yeah, I got him right here. So let's compare all the different options that we have belt-wise, right? So we have the 2 leather belts in front. You saw the comparison between a more rigid leather belt and then just a normal dress belt. Obviously, we can eliminate this as an issue for one of the classes or events we'll be running out at our range. If we take a look at a belt like this, you might want to choose one of these because they're a little bit more classy, a little bit more low profile. Actually, underneath all this, I'm wearing one of these personally. They're just a very solid option. They're not too rigid. You were mentioning earlier, if you're not wearing a undershirt or anything like that, some of the more thick belts, they actually do pinch the sides. So very solid option if you're just going to run minimalist kit. But when we take a look at some of the more modern rigid designs, we can compare the two, and they're both very rigid. However, these are made of multiple layers of scuba webbing. So this particular belt has 3 layers of scuba webbing. You can see how thick it is and how rigid it is. And what's nice is that they do have the newer Cobra buckles, so you can detach really quickly if you need to. And they also have pull tabs to go ahead and adjust on the fly. Whereas with all of the belts, you gotta unbuckle and rebuckle, and these are a lot more simple. There are other options as well on the market. So much like the 2 leather belts, there's a single or double ply nylon, which aren't as rigid if you wanted to buy a belt in this configuration.
So just to conclude, if you're going to be participating in any classes or shooting events, it's very, very important to consider the belt on which you'll be supporting your equipment on. So basically, we recommend either a nylon belt or the heavier style dress belt, but both should be as thick as possible and as stiff as possible. And the same thing with a holster. You don't have to have an overly expensive holster, but make sure that you wear your equipment properly and combine the things properly. Otherwise, it's not going to be as much fun or safe shooting, so it's very important.
Yep.
Anything to conclude, Max?
No, that's pretty much all I got. Just make sure you set everything up correctly before showing up to one of the classes, and if you have any questions, just email us, message us. I don't know how they're communicating nowadays. They all these young kids and their TikTok.
Sounds good. We'll see you on the range.